And with that, we should actually be live now. Hopefully, this version of the stream is not going to be exceedingly broken, but apparently, every time OBS upgrades itself, it's almost like somebody went into the server room with a hammer and started saying, "This one's broken, I'll fix it." And then when they look at the pile of RAM sticks that they've destroyed on the ground, they wonder why the hell it's not working. Well, I can at least take one guess as to why this version of OBS is not working. Same with Opera, by the way. If you just happen to be an employee working at the company that distributes the Opera browser, then just so you know, for some reason it won't actually let me do live streams through Opera, and I'd kind of like to do it through that. So please fix that. I don't want to have to downgrade my version of Opera just to do live streams on it. Anyway, with that said, how is everybody doing today? Today is Tuesday, I think. Maybe, possibly. The days kind of blend together after a while. So, today we have a debate. Aliakai is going to be the moderator, and she will be explaining the parameters of the debate. But before that, I'd like to introduce my interlocutor, Michael Moreno. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having this with me.
Awesome. Well, Michael reached out to me on Twitter after I did a quick coverage of 3 minutes of his video, because after that point I was like, okay, I'm done. If there's something else I got to worry about in here, you guys will let me know in the comment section, which is usually what happens. My audience is decently good about checking me on that. But that said, instead of trying to go over and do another response to that video in full, we figured it would probably be more productive if him and I just sat down and had a debate on that. The format of the debate, Aliakai will get into here in a sec, but figured that would probably be the most useful way to go about this.
Well, and we also discussed ahead of time that it would probably be most useful to do this in a slightly more formalized debate structure. Number one, because Michael has experience in that regard, and number two, because, well, the last time you did kind of a more informal debate without a moderator, it didn't turn out so well. So there's not going to be a lot of engagement with the live chat, at least on Suris's stream, until at the end at most, after closing statements, if we decide to do that. Up until then, we're going to be discussing the pending question, which is the Supreme Court's decision regarding LGBTQ people immoral? Michael Moreno will be taking the affirmative position that it is immoral, and Suris will be taking the negative position that it is not. As such, Michael Moreno is going to be taking the opening statement first. We're going to be doing 5 minutes for opening statements, and then afterwards we're going to be doing 3 rebuttal periods, again starting with Michael, where each rebuttal period will last 3 minutes. I will be stepping in periodically at 30-second warning times to let you guys know when you're at the end, because of the fact that this is not a situation where we have a live audience that can just raise their hands and get called on. If you want to yield your time, you can yield your time to the other person. That's not going to add any extra time to their statements. It'll just end your time and they get to start theirs. We cannot yield to questions because it's a little bit difficult because of the stream delays and everything to yield for questions for the audience. So if we're going to do an audience question period, we'll decide after closing statements to do that. After the rebuttals, we're going to have a 15-minute freeform period where you guys can go back and forth without having any sort of timers. I will step in and mute both of you if you start talking over each other, pause the timer, let you know who gets to talk and in what order, and then start the timer again. After the 15 minutes, you each get a 5-minute closing statement, starting with Suris and ending with Michael. And after that, from there, we can decide whether we want to do audience questions or not. That's not a part that was discussed with me, but it is an option if you guys decide that, things went well enough that you want to engage with either audience a little bit. Do you guys have any questions? Is that agreeable?
Yeah, so is there any prep time by chance?
In terms of prep time, I figured you both had prepared ahead of time. So
No, yeah. I mean, like during rebuttals. So after Suris gives his speech, if I need time to, note take my responses, is there anything like that, or just straight to the next speech?
I was thinking straight to the next speech to try to keep time condensed enough that if we want to do audience questions, we'd have enough time. Would you like to request a small amount of prep time for either of you to take notes? Is that something you would like?
I mean, I think a good way to be doing it is if either of us need 30 seconds just to get everything prepared for the speech.
I think that's
fine.
fair. I think that's fair.
Okay.
That'll also give a second if one of us has to steel man the other's position real quick, so we're not arguing past each other. That'll probably work for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just put it forward that if you need a little bit of prep time before your response, let me know, and I can give you, say, up to 2 minutes of prep time. That should be fair. And we can just kind of, sit or, say hi to the audience or something, converse, that kind of thing. All right. So with that, the floor would then yield to Michael. I'm going to start the timer. I will give you a 30-second warning when you're reaching toward the end, and then if you hit that timer, then you will hear it go off on my phone. So it'll be pretty loud.
So in terms of the warning, are you just going to audibly say 30 seconds?
Yep, I will cut in and say 30-second warning because that's the only way. Otherwise, I would do the countdown if I had access to a camera. Right now, I can't be in my office because of back problems, so my background is not the best.
Okay.
All right, so your 5-minute timer starts now. Michael, opening statements.
The Supreme Court's ruling against LGBTQ workplace discrimination and other anti-discrimination laws like it are immoral. This is because they violate the principle of liberty, the principle that all people should be allowed to follow their own pursuits regardless of what other people think. No one should be forced to worship gods they don't believe in, affirm values they don't hold, or associate with people they don't want to. Simply put, your life belongs to you, and you must be humble in knowing that it's not your place to decide what other people do with their own life. Therefore, the function of laws is not to force any particular morality onto people, but rather to prevent people from forcing their morality onto others. The only time that laws should restrict action is when that action is restricting someone else's ability to act, like murder and theft. In other words, no matter how stupid or immoral people might think you're being, so long as you're not harming anyone, you can do whatever you want, because what people should do and what they should be allowed to do are not the same thing. I don't think people should do drugs, but it's their life, not mine. Many religious people think that gay people shouldn't get married, but they don't get a say because it's not their life. And so while I agree that employers should not discriminate, they should be allowed to because it's their life. Now, Suris agrees with me on this. At 3:45 of his video, he said that if it's your life and you're not harming anyone, he 110% agrees. So unless he plans on going back on this position, the crux of this debate is going to come down to two questions. Is not employing someone harmful, and does the principle of liberty extend to businesses? To answer the first, we have to know what constitutes a harm. In this context, a harm refers specifically to involuntary expenses against other people. That is to say, the only criteria we should look to in determining whether a harm has occurred is consent. This becomes obvious if you just think about harmful situations and consider what makes them harmful. If someone randomly punches you on the street, they've obviously harmed you. If someone punches you in a boxing fight that you've agreed to be in, they have not harmed you. The only relevant difference between these two situations is consent. If someone sells you drugs and then you become addicted and unhealthy, they have not harmed you because you asked for the drugs and consumed them yourself. Bad effects and unfortunate consequences are therefore irrelevant to the question of harm. This also rules out other colloquially defined instances of harm, like mental harm. If a woman breaks up with a man, he's probably going to be upset. He might even become depressed and possibly suicidal, but that doesn't mean that the woman harmed him. If I make an argument and it offends someone, I have not harmed them. The principle between both of these situations is that you are responsible for your own emotions, no one else. In fact, making me responsible for other people's emotions would make exercising my liberty impossible, as no matter what I do, someone somewhere might get offended about it. Now that we've established that harm refers specifically to involuntary expense against other people, we need to acknowledge another principle, which is that the lack of a positive is not a negative. The lack of +1 is not -1. It's just 0. Choosing not to help someone is not harming them. It's just not helping them. Not giving money to the homeless is not taking money from the homeless. And so not employing someone is not taking anything away from them and is therefore not a harm. Likewise, giving a positive and then stopping giving a positive is also not a negative. Giving someone money and then ceasing to give them more money is not taking any money from them. And so employing someone and then discontinuing to employ them or firing them is not harming them. It's also important to note that motivation is entirely irrelevant here. If I choose not to donate money to the homeless because I hate them and want them to be poor, I still haven't harmed them, even though my motivations are immoral. By the same token, if I steal your money so that I can invest it into the stock market to make you more money, I've still harmed you because you didn't give consent. My motivations being benevolent were irrelevant. And so while I completely agree that employers who discriminate have immoral motivations, they're still not harming anyone. Now, Suris might respond to these claims by invoking hypotheticals where people are unable to be hired and therefore starve in poverty and die. These don't change anything, as just in the same way that not helping someone is not harming them, letting someone die is not killing them. If someone needs my kidney to live and I refuse to give it to them, I haven't killed anyone. I've simply kept what's mine, and they've died on their own. No causality was involved on my part. And so if a business refuses to hire someone, they are not harming anyone, regardless of if they're the only business nearby or if the only other option is poverty. Now, going back to the second question, does individual liberty extend to businesses? Yes, because all that a business is a product of individual liberty. I go out and earn money, and then I use my money to buy infrastructure and resources or the means of production, all of which are now extensions of my liberty because I own them and I have a right to my own property. I then approach other individuals and offer to pay them money in exchange for them to perform services for me. They then voluntarily agree to work for me by the conditions that I set. The
30-second warning.
The distinction between individuals and businesses is an arbitrary one because businesses are a natural result of individuals exercising their liberty. And even if businesses are different entities, putting regulations on them would necessarily infringe on individual liberty because any regulations you put on the business is going to apply to the individuals who own the business. Thank you.
Okay. So, Suris, you are making opening statements in the negative that the Supreme Court decision regarding LGBTQ people is not immoral, correct?
Correct.
All right, timer starts now.
Okay, opening statements. Well, these are always a little bit awkward, since what I want to do is immediately respond to what Michael said, but that's not really what I can do right now, so I'll wait for that moment. The resolution of the debate is whether or not the Supreme Court decision on firing LGBTQ people is immoral. The material reality of the situation is such that any discriminatory firing practices should be guarded against. Would that we lived in a normative world where these kind of laws were not required? Alas, we currently don't. Currently, the U.S. has 8.1 million LGBTQ people, though, given the propensity for closeting for self-protection, that number's likely higher, especially complicated by census statistics generally only measuring same-sex couples, single individuals, or otherwise aren't consistently accounted for. As an example, bisexual people who are with opposite-sex partners generally get counted as straight in census data. So what I'm basically saying is the issue affects a lot of people. 1/5 of our fellow LGBTQ citizens have experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation when applying for jobs. 22% of LGBTQ employees are not paid equally and are not promoted at the same rate as their peers. A 1/5 ratio like that doesn't come out of the blue. It's not as if LGBTQ people are on the whole shoddy at their work ethic. 34% of LGBTQ Americans say that they have been verbally harassed while using the restroom at the workplace. Almost half of LGBTQ people, 46% specifically, closet themselves in the workplace. Nearly 2/3 of non-LGBTQ people believe falsely that it is unprofessional to discuss orientation or identity in the workplace. Many of these people also have no problem talking about opposite-sex partners and aspirations for dating and other orientation-related escapades. So it's really not professionalism being sought, but merely wanting to not upset the status quo, which can lead to personal discomfort. The fact that you have gay coworkers or trans coworkers doesn't care about your feelings, though. And then fewer than 0.3% of Fortune 500 board directors were openly LGBTQ in 2020. This is due to two factors. One, generational wealth plays a key role in your starting position in life and employment. And two, it's hard to move up in a company if all it takes is a single bigot to get you fired, if the company is allowed to fire you on such broad terms. This is a point where me and Michael would likely both agree, though we disagree on what the material ending of what the Supreme Court ruling should be here. It should be noted, though, that the Supreme Court's ruling doesn't offer any new protections. It's just an extension of previous protections that were in place based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which originally created protections based on skin color and birth sex. It now extends to employees to prevent them from being fired on the basis of orientation and identity, which are about as controllable as skin color. This means that workers across the U.S. cannot be fired for being LGBTQ. This does not mean that there are hiring incentives or affirmative action. This is merely about protecting an existing employee. These laws protect employees from being fired for simply existing as themselves. That's it. Any deviation from this particular resolution, therefore, would mark a red herring for my opponent, and I hold the right to dismiss any red herrings like that as their only purpose is to diverse from the thesis of the debate, which is about the right to fire for being LGBTQ. When dealing with morality specifically, we have to ask ourselves, what material world are we constructing? If we stick only to the hypothetical and boil everything down to mere mathematics, we ignore people who legitimately get hurt by the existence of this kind of discrimination. Again, the argument isn't about hiring practices. No one has the right to be hired for being gay. But I'd argue that you certainly should have the ability to be comfortable at a job as yourself. It is not the company's business what you do in your bedroom or in your private time that harms nobody, so it shouldn't factor into firing decisions, especially legally sanctioned ones. We also have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of a law? I would argue that laws exist in order to protect certain freedoms for individuals living in a society. We cannot agree on a universal morality. If we could, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and philosophers wouldn't have been having it for thousands of years. Thus, laws exist to construct a society where citizens can operate with the highest level and degree of freedom possible. In our capitalist society, part of that freedom is largely gated behind wages. So when we are constructing laws for the workplace, we have a moral imperative to make sure that those in our society are not unduly gatekept from receiving fair, or in worst case, any wages. Is it moral for a company to take away your means to support yourself, thereby taking away all means of your own autonomy? I would argue yes, if they are doing so unjustly. And without certain legal protections, companies have in the past fired people unjustly, and I don't want to perpetuate that particular material reality. And that is the end of mine.
Okay. So that brings us to the rebuttal section. Michael, do you need a moment to prepare, or are you ready for your first 3-minute segment? You're muted, Michael.
You're muted, Michael.
Just like 30 seconds, thanks.
Let me know when you are ready. I've got a 2-minute timer going. If you need less time than that, just let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
By the way, hi everybody in the chat. I see Oceans chilling in the chat. I see MUI Pikachu. I saw Divine Disbelief and Gainer, who is in my Discord. I also see Jen Aldrich, who's my co-host over on Xenobridge. So thank you guys all for coming out.
I should be good.
Okay.
Okay. So I will stop this timer. I will give you 3 minutes for your rebuttal. Just as last time, you will get a 30-second warning when you're getting close to the end of your time. Okay?
Okay.
All right. 3 minutes starts now.
Okay. So Suris starts out by mentioning that this affects a lot of people and has the potential to affect a lot of people. There's millions of LGBTQ members and 1/5 experience discrimination or something along those lines. Scale doesn't change the fact that no one is being harmed. Many people are simply not being helped. No harm has occurred. Suris has not refuted my explanation as to the distinction between not helping someone and harming them. So simply saying that lots of people are not going to be helped doesn't prove that they're being harmed. Lots of people are denied organ transplants. That doesn't mean that they're having any rights violated, because the alternative would be violating rights to take away people's kidneys. He makes the argument that the Supreme Court ruling isn't anything new, it's just a consistent extension. And that's true. I think the Supreme Court should be consistent. But rulings that are consistent with immoral rulings are also immoral. If the Supreme Court previously had a ruling that Black people couldn't go into certain areas, and then 100 years later they extended that to a different type of area, both rulings would be immoral. He makes the argument that when dealing with morality, we have to ask what type of material world we want. I completely disagree. I explained in the beginning that we shouldn't be trying to force our subjective moral greater good onto other people. Plenty of conservatives think that a better material world would be one without gay marriage. Plenty of neo-Nazis and those types of radicals think that the world would be better without certain groups of people. So the framework of libertarianism that I've promoted and has not been contested yet in this debate means that your subjective wants for the world don't matter. All that matters is harm. Also, that's an appeal to consequence fallacy, because basically what he's doing is he's taking a principle that we've already agreed on, liberty, and then he's looking at the conclusion that it might lead to, and then rejecting the principle based on the desirability of the conclusion. Like when religious people look at scientific evidence and they see the implications of, oh, that's bad for my religion, I'm going to reject it. So that's fallacious reasoning and should be rejected. And also, it's not necessarily the case that that's going to happen, because capitalism serves to help all people. Anytime there's a group that's missing an entire service, that demand is going to generate a supply, right? Capitalism only cares about the color green. If an entire group of people aren't being hired, there are going to be, more tolerant businesses hiring them. Now, he says that you should have the right to do what you want with your own life and that it's not the company's business. Well, one, not hiring you is not affecting what you do in your own life. You can still be gay. You just can't work for someone else who's uncomfortable with it, which is totally fair because that's their life. Also, you don't get to decide which conditions are relevant and which ones they aren't. If I have a business, I'm allowed to set whatever conditions I want because it's my business. If I'm uncomfortable with a trans person or a gay person, I'm allowed to say that that's a sufficient condition because it's my business. He says laws exist to protect freedoms, and I totally agree, but you don't have the right to someone else's wages because that's their wages. If being alive requires someone else's resources, you don't have a right to it. Thank you.
All right, sweet. That was exactly on time. So you must be running your own timers or something, or you've just done this for a while, Michael.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So Suris, your rebuttal, do you need a moment to prepare your statement, or would you like to go straight off the bat? Suris, you're muted.
Nope. That's going to be a problem for both of us. Give me about 30 seconds, and I will get something set up.
All right, I will start a 2-minute timer and go back to chatting at the chat. Michael, you can probably have a chat with your chat if you want. Just don't make any arguments toward the debate.
Okay.
Our chat is going nuts. You are currently muted in Zoom, by the way, so our chat can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to my chat.
Okay. I only say our chat because I am subscribed to Suris, so that's the stream that I'm watching and watching over because I moderate in his live chat as well. So.
Gotcha.
You've got about a minute left, Suris.
Okay. All right, I'm good.
Okay, let me reset the timer really quick. So we are doing 3 minutes of rebuttals. Michael, if you're engaging with your chat or something, if you're distracted, come back to us. Chris, your timer starts now.
Sure thing. So in Michael's rebuttal, he says that scale doesn't matter. I would argue that it does in fact matter because we're dealing with the material world. We're not just dealing with hypotheticals. So if something were to affect 60% of Americans or 70% of Americans, that would be more imperative for me to deal with than something affecting 10% of Americans as an example. Scale does, in fact, matter. It shows how many people are being affected by something. You argue that I made an appeal to consequence, and that is the fallacy. I'd argue that that's not the case here, because an appeal to consequence is the idea that a proposition is either true or false based on its consequences, but this use of the fallacy doesn't necessarily apply to things like laws. Laws, by their nature, are designed to lead to material consequences for individuals. This is not necessarily outside of that particular category. I'm not saying that something is moral or immoral based on its consequences. I am saying that a law is being created for a particular consequence, which is a thing that laws do materially all the time. You argue that the civil rights ruling is immoral. So by my view of morality, since I do believe that that morality exists for us to live in a better world, we constructed and agreed on particular moral principles as a result of that. Not that we can all agree on the same principles. We have to look at what material world we're constructed if we didn't have the Civil Rights Act. We lived in a much worse one before the Civil Rights Act. After the Civil Rights Act, we have lived in a better material world as far as people who are born to a sex that a company may or may not want are concerned. You made the argument that neo-Nazis and conservatives have different ideas of what is moral. That is fair, but we can actually determine whether or not their ideas of what is moral are good based on the material consequences of those ideas. We can look at Nazi Germany and see what happened in their society, and we can see some of the particular end results of standard conservatism and see what type of society constructed as a result of those. You mentioned that I had not refuted libertarianism. This is a red herring. That's not the resolution of the debate. It doesn't fucking matter. Also, if an entire group of people aren't hired, the idea that there will just be a more tolerant business to hire them is sticking strictly within the hypothetical. This is not always the material reality for a person, and their geographical ability to get into a new position is largely based on their ability to receive wages. Now, granted, you've made the point during your discussion that no one is entitled to wages, and I agree, no one is entitled to wages, but when we're talking about the relationship between an employee and an
30-second warning.
Okay. We're talking about the relationship between an employee and an employer. It is not strictly the employer giving something to the employee. It is very much transactional. There's a trading of labor that is happening for wages. You say that not hiring isn't affecting you, but not hiring very much affects somebody. If you do not have money, you are incredibly affected. But not hiring is not the thesis of the debate. It is not the resolution. This is about the ability to fire. We're talking about LGBTQ employees who are already in businesses getting fired.
All right, finish your remarks.
Okay.
Okay, Michael, do you need a moment to prep?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'll start a 2-minute timer for preparation and chat with our chat for a bit. Timer starts now. I see Jen is currently setting the chat on fire. This is something that Jen is very good at. Jen set our chat on fire last night, too. By the way, for those of you who haven't seen my channel or any of my work anywhere else, Divine Disbelief and I are going to be doing a stream tonight over on their channel on Heaven and Hell, the History of the Afterlife. If you guys want to come chill with us, we'd really appreciate it. Because I've seen Jen and Divine Disbelief chilling in the chat, too. So, might as well chill. Suris gave me permission to chill during breaks, so... Hey, if I'm here keeping y'all from getting into fights, I might as well get to chill.
Fair enough.
All right, 1 minute left, Michael?
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay. Let me reset the timer really quick. So we are on Rebuttal Round 2. Michael, your timer starts now.
1 second. Oh, reset that. Let me get my time ready.
Okay, no problem. Okay, let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I am ready.
Timer starts now.
So on the argument about scale, Suris argues that scale does matter because we are dealing with the material world, not just hypotheticals, and that if it were to affect like 60% of Americans, that would be important. Again, material world is based on subjective morality. He has not responded to this argument. Whether or not a certain world and its material effects are good is going to be subject to whatever morality you hold. And he hasn't contested my argument that people should be allowed to hold their own morality. In fact, he's agreed with it repeatedly. Also, not helping someone does not affect them by definition, because affect is inherently causal, and letting someone die is not causal. If someone flicks over dominoes and I don't stop it, I didn't cause the dominoes to fall. I had no effect on those dominoes. And so even if 60% of America is dying because I don't employ them, I'm not affecting them. Until he responds to this understanding of effect, he can't make arguments about material world effects. Now, he makes the argument that with the Supreme Court ruling, when dealing with morality, we have to ask what type of material world that we want. Again, I've already refuted this. That's entirely not the point. We don't ask what material world we want. We ask, are people harming people? Are they preventing other people from achieving their own material worlds? So again, until he responds to my claims about how these are just subjective moral views, it doesn't matter. He makes the argument that we can determine if these worldviews are good based on their consequences, but that just shifts the problem one level lower, because whether or not a consequence is good is subjective to your moral worldview. I'm sure Nazis think that a material world where Jews don't exist is a good world. This is the same problem, just with a different word. He hasn't gotten out of it. On the appeal to consequence argument, he says that laws are designed to appeal to consequences, but he hasn't contested my argument that the only purpose of laws is to prevent people from harming each other. Until he responds to that, he can't make this argument. And again, what consequences? How do we decide what type of laws we should structure it? 200 years ago, we thought that a good consequence would be laws enslaving Black people. Again, that's not the function of laws. Now, on the argument that, so I make the argument that capitalism only cares about green and these people will get jobs. And he says, well, that's not always the case. True, it's conceivable that there is a worldview where people won't. But again, I'm biting the bullet. Even if there's a worldview where people don't get jobs and they starve and die in poverty, that's not a harm. And that is permissible under a libertarian framework. He argues that we don't have a libertarian framework, but we do, because he agreed with me, both in this debate and in the video, that people should be allowed to do what they want to do with their own life so long as they're not harming anyone. That is the definition of libertarianism. You might not like the word, but that's what liberty is. He makes the argument that, so he agrees with me that no one's entitled to someone else's wages, but he says that we're talking about a relationship between employers. And so it's not simply giving something, it's transactional. Sure, that's true with anything. In a relationship between a man and a woman, it's a give and take, it's transactional. That doesn't mean that there aren't still conditions you get to set. Just because I give you something and you give it back doesn't mean that I don't get to set the conditions per the deal. That's what makes it a deal, is that both sides voluntarily agree.
Please wrap up. Okay. Suris, do you need a moment to prepare your response, or would you like to just jump into it?
I think I can just jump into this one.
Okay. So are you ready?
I hear that my earbuds fell out.
Okay, I'll wait just a second. It'll work.
Okay, they're back in. Is prep time happening?
No, he decided he wanted to ignore prep time. I, however, would like to interrupt for 2 seconds. We have a super chat from Brutus Magnuson. Do you want to do super chats at the end, or would you like me to read them out?
Super chats are going to be at the end.
Okay, so for those of you who do super chats, I will be putting them aside, copy pasting them and stuff if Suris doesn't have a way to do that. But we're not going to be reading super chats for the end in case they affect the argument. I wanted to make sure we didn't go over that beforehand. Sorry about that. Okay, so timer starts now, Suris. Rebuttal round 2.
Okay. On the argument of scale, Michael says it doesn't matter. The material worlds are based on particular subjective moralities. So the scale of Nazi Germany killing Jews, they would say that within their subjective morality, that was a good thing. I can understand that argument. I just don't agree with it. But he says that not helping someone doesn't affect someone. It's not causal. But there's a problem here. You say that you've refuted my material world issue. No, you've asserted that that is not the case, which is what I did when I talked about the argument of scale. I've asserted a thing. I have not refuted it. I'm not talking about hiring people. You are the hypothetical you brought up was 60% of the world starving, and you had the ability to hire them, and you didn't, and therefore you did not affect them. You didn't actually cause any harm. But we're not talking about not doing something. We're talking about actively doing something. The act of firing someone is actively doing something. I am talking about firing them. Therefore, you are committing a category error. If we would like to play fallacy bingo with me with consequentialism, I am perfectly fine playing fallacy bingo the other way around. You argue that 200 years ago we thought slavery was good, which is true, but you say that this means that laws are not to functionally make a better material world. No, not necessarily. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. The function of the idea of law is separate to the result of certain laws. If there are laws that are brought in by a terrible dictator, then fine. Those laws are bad and sometimes we're going to do something about them. But the mere fact that some laws are good and some laws are not good does not change the integral function of law. You say that it's conceivable that there is a world where people don't get jobs and starve and die in poverty. You can say conceivable. I say that that's the material reality we currently live in. It happens all the time. Hell, I've actually been homeless myself. I've been in this situation myself. I've gone through it on my own. Granted, I didn't starve and die, but it is a reality that I have been in on my own. And then you made the argument that I said that you guys don't have a libertarian framework. That's not what I said. I never said anything about you guys not having a libertarian framework. My argument was that people's freedoms are directly related to their monetary ability in our current society. Their freedom to do X amount of things is directly related to their monetary ability to do X amount of things. There are certain activities that I cannot engage in due to my monetary position. There are certain activities that people much
30
richer
second warning.
than me can or cannot engage in based on their monetary ability. My dog is trying desperately to get in on this debate, and I don't know why. I don't know what my dog has to say about material realities or anything like that, but apparently my dog is exercising her libertarian free will to try to assert that. Okay, that was a bad joke. But anyway, point being, there are a lot of things in your statement where you said things that I did not say. I didn't say you didn't have a libertarian framework. And we're talking about firing, not hiring. Okay, good.
Okay, yeah, prep time.
Sorry for muting you, by the way, Michael. It just we got
yeah,
complaints in
sorry.
the chat from Suris typing earlier, and I muted him too.
I forgot to mute myself.
Fair enough.
Okay, starting a timer for 2 minutes of prep time now. Also, you might want to go take care of Growlithe, Suris.
I wish that was a thing that I can do, but that is Raz and Aaron's responsibility at the moment, I think.
Nighty. So I don't know if you have access to the super chats, but I am
see the super
cataloging
chats
them.
perfectly fine.
Okay, sweet. So I don't have to catalog them.
Nope.
Sweet. That's good. I used to have to do that on the channel I used to work on. So for the audience, in terms of structure, this is going to be the final round of rebuttals, and then we are going to go into the 15-minute discussion section before we do wrap-ups. After that, we can make a decision as to whether or not to take audience questions and how to structure that.
Mm-hmm.
1 minute warning, Michael?
Okay.
Rilla says she loves me a poem by Doggo.
All I'm saying is Growlithe has no care for rules of any kind. None at all. None at all.
I mean, to be fair, she does interrupt like everything all the time. It is adorbs.
She does, and normally I don't have a problem with it. Normally I just be like, here, Growlithe, come in my lap. But that's a little difficult here.
All right, that is the end of prep time.
Okay. Great. Tell me when I have. Let me get my timer set up.
Okay. As soon as your timer's set up, I'll give the announcement.
Okay. Wait, where am I at? Okay.
Okay, so this is round 3 of rebuttals. Final round starting Michael Moreno. Timer starts now.
Okay, so starting on the first criticism, which is the argument about scale and kind of turned into the argument about subjective morality, material effects, he says with the Nazi worldview, he can understand that argument, but he just doesn't agree with it. That's not a substantive response. What mechanism do you use to differentiate between immoral material world effects and moral world effects? You can't just say to a Nazi, well, I just disagree with your moral worldview, because then they can say the exact same thing to you. In fact, very religious people can say the same thing about LGBTQ people. They'd say, well, in a moral world, there would be no gay marriage. And then your only response would be, I just don't agree with that. And then they would rejoinder with, well, I just don't agree with that. If you don't give a mechanism to differentiate between objective morals or what type of consequence we should have, then you haven't answered my criticism that, or my argument that we shouldn't be forcing subjective moral worldviews on people. He makes the argument that there are laws that are just and there are unjust laws. So if a law is by a dictator, then they are bad. Again, why? What is the mechanism that you are using to make this argument? What if dictatorship is actually good? That is conceivable, at least. You're just presupposing that certain things are bad, which is exactly what dictators do. Like Hitler, the dictator, presupposed that Jews were bad. Why is his opinion any less valid than yours, given the current argumentation? And it's also worth noting that he hasn't responded to my argument as to why not hiring someone is not affecting them. I guess he did towards the argument. We'll get to that. It's the fire argument. So on the argument about how capitalism is green, he makes the argument that, yeah, it's not just conceivable that people won't hire people. That's the world we live in. And again, I agree. Even if that's the case, I will just bite the bullet. I'm okay with people not getting jobs and then potentially dying. Now, personally, I don't think that's great. But in terms of a libertarian framework, that is permissible. Until he refutes my argument that people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do, which involves letting people die, then I'm winning this argument. He makes the argument that we're not just talking about not hiring someone, but actively doing something, specifically firing them. I already addressed this. Giving a positive and then discontinuing to give it is not a negative. It's also a zero. In the same way that if a girl starts dating someone and then she breaks up with that person, she's actively doing something, but that action is simply neutralizing the dependency, the relationship. It's back at neutrality. So again, something being an action doesn't mean that it's harmful. It has to be an inherently negative action. And he hasn't responded to my explanation as to how certain actions are either lack of a positive or negative or positive or neutral. So I'm winning that argument. There are plenty of examples where action is permissible.
30-second warning.
If, for example, a home intruder, if someone comes into your house, you're allowed to act against them by shooting them because they are violating your liberty. Or you can make the same argument about abortion, which I suspect Suris supports. Now, with the argument about, additionally, positive rights can't exist. Someone being alive through wages can't exist because if they rely on wages or a job, then they rely on the voluntary service of other people. If they rely on the voluntary service of other people, then they can be denied. And if they can be denied, then it can't be a right because that's the definition of what rights are. So he can't claim that people have the freedom to have money.
Okay, I've requested that Suris unmute on Zoom. Suris, you were getting complaints in your chat about your keyboard. I muted you on Zoom so that Michael's people couldn't hear you anymore, but I can't do that on OBS. So,
Okay.
do you need prep time?
Apparently, since apparently Growlithe is jumping in paint cans or something, which is
What are rules?
not the thing that I wanted to deal with during this. But
so do you need 2 minutes of prep time then?
hold on, I might do just 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll start the 2-minute timer, and if you need less than that, just let me know like Michael did at the start. Okay. This is the last rebuttal that you're going to get before the 15-minute freeform section, and I'll explain the rules of that again when we get there. Oh, we've got another super chat. Thank you so much, Eifer Brennan. Again, everybody, for those of you that are sending super chats over in Suris's chats, we are going to be reading them at the end. So thank you so much for your patience. One minute warning, Suris. Sorry, I didn't get to you till it was 52 seconds. Oz, if you really like Real Suris, go check out Suris's interview over on my channel. Real Suris is there for about 3/4 of that discussion. It was glorious and chaotic because, well, that channel. Uh, 10 seconds, Suris. Okay, that is the end of prep time.
Okay.
You ready to unmute? You are currently muted.
I thought I wasn't unmuted, but apparently I was. Okay, so the first thing is obviously we need to...
Wait, Suris, I hadn't started your timer.
Oh, I thought you had. Okay, well, obviously I made mistakes.
Final rebuttal, Suris, your time starts now.
Okay, so when we talk about firing somebody, we try to argue, or Michael has tried to argue, that firing someone does not harm them. This is based on Michael's definition of harm, but I don't think his definition of harm really reflects reality. Harm, in reality, is any kind of injury, and injury can extend beyond mere surface physicality. Mental harm and trauma can be measured. Things like PTSD exist. They manifest in things like an enlarged amygdala. We actually have a lot of studies on neuroplasticity that show that things like firing somebody and having them have an entire downward spiral can cause mental harm that ends up needing things like psychiatry, sometimes drugs and therapy, to actually overcome. Tries to argue that the argument of scale and subjective morality is not a substantive one. You're right, it wasn't. My point was to try to use that as an example to show why your refutation was merely an assertion, by using the same methodology. What argument do we use to determine immoral world effects? Well, generally, we would see a net increase in harm or a net reduction in harm. Since this harm can be any kind of injury, that net increase in harm can simply be, for Nazi Germany, 6 million Jews and 4 million Slavs. They were harmed. They were killed. That is measurable harm that only existed due to their particular moral framework. That is a measurable consequence of that framework. So, if we use that definition of harm, if we functionally have a definition of harm that does not simply work in the physical, then we can actually start evaluating why these particular laws are put into place. Michael argues that giving a positive and then taking it away is not a negative, it is a neutral, but this again, as I've stated before, ignores material reality. Michael asserts that it is not inherently a negative action because a +1 and then a -1 simply equals a 0. But here's the bits of nuance and material reality that are completely ignored here. If you fire somebody, it is not just having a job and then not having a job. Your existence is different post-job than it is pre-job. You don't merely go back to your existence pre-job. In many cases, you end up losing functional relationships. You end up having stains on your record that prevent you from getting fired at later jobs as a result. Things that did not exist on your record to begin with. It is not simply a -1. There are more material consequences than simply removing the job. This is not to say that an employer is responsible for every single material consequence that comes from firing somebody, but the purpose of the Supreme Court law
30-second warning
is to prevent an employer from unjustly firing somebody, leading to that particular domino effect. +1s and -1s do not exist in vacuums. If they existed in vacuums, we would be arguing completely in the realm of the hypothetical. We are not arguing fully in the realm of the hypothetical. We are arguing in reality. In reality, getting fired from a job can hurt your prospects to get a job in the future, and it does. In reality, getting fired from a job can prevent you from being able to feed yourself in the here and now, which was not part of your reality beforehand.
Okay, so that concludes the formal rebuttal portion of the debate. If you guys need a little bit of time to prepare for the discussion portion, this is going to be a lot more free form. So you are muted currently, Michael, so if you're talking to us, we can't hear you. But if you guys need a little bit of time to prepare for the informal discussion, what I'm going to do is run a timer for 15 minutes. As I've said before, if I have to stop you guys because you're talking over each other, you'll both get muted. My timer will be, paused before I mute you guys. I'll explain who gets to talk first, and then we'll start the timer again, and you guys will get to start your discussion again. This is going to be more like the sort of informal discussion that we see in other places, but with the rule that, obviously don't attack each other on a personal level, please. Like, I really don't want to have to break up that schoolyard argument. So that said, I want to take a chance to shill for both of you for a second. I noticed that over in Suris's chat, we've got 268 people chilling in our chat and only 72 likes. Please give Suris a like. If you're in Michael's chats and you have not liked his video yet, make sure that you give that like on his side as well. I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can here. Like, they both need this stuff in the algorithm, so do a promotion for your preferred interlocutor. Give them some love. There we go. So with that in mind, would either of you like to unmute and request some time for preparation, or do you guys just want me to start the 15-minute timer?
I would say if it's just a free-form discussion, we can probably just go back and forth from here. It's not like we have to set up a speech at this point.
Okay. Michael, are you in the same position?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So free-form discussion, 15-minute timer starts now.
So it seems like our two main areas of disagreement is whether or not A, we should create laws to construct better material worlds, and then B, how do we determine is it even possible to determine that on an objective standard? And then the second issue is whether or not firing someone and taking them from a position and putting them in a worse position is harming them. Do you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with that assessment. There's probably more that we are contentious on right now, but those are two things that we certainly have contentions on. Okay.
Do you want to start with the giving a positive, or rather firing someone argument?
So where the firing someone argument is concerned, if your position is that hiring is a +1 and then firing is a -1, my position is that hiring may be a +1, or even calling it a +1 is not necessarily even an accurate way to describe it, because it's a transactional endeavor. The person who is getting hired is giving labor in exchange for wages. Even arguing that this is a +1 is not necessarily reflective of reality, especially when you consider the fact that currently we actually, employers generally get more from labor than the people who put in the labor do monetarily. It's what allows them the ability to be employers. That excess runoff is what allows them to do that. So my first contention is just that the +1 isn't necessarily just a +1. My second issue with it is that if you say everything is a +1 and -1, when you boil everything down to mathematics like that, that compartmentalizes everything into nice, safe little boxes, but that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. If a person existed...
Suris, you've been going on for almost 2 minutes. You want to give a chance to let him respond?
Sure.
Yeah, it might be better just to do direct on them. So on the argument that it's like transactional, and that they're exchanging things, again, I agree with that. So like, someone works for me and then I pay them for it. Fair deal. Everyone has been compensated. And then I choose to stop giving them more money because I don't want them to give me more labor. No one's been stolen from because they haven't given me any labor. Now, if they worked for me for a month and I didn't pay them, or let's say I fired them and the contract was I was going to pay them after they were done with their labor and then I didn't, then that would be theft or a harm. But once I fire them, I've already paid them for all of the work they've done. Does that make sense?
So it makes sense halfway. You've got one issue, which is that we have the whole labor theory of value issue, where it's not necessarily that you've paid them for their labor, they've been given their dues. That's not even necessarily their dues in many cases. That excess profit is what allows you to be a business owner in the first place. So there's a nuance issue there.
Yeah, I mean, the surplus value argument kind of introduces a new layer to this debate. Because if that's true, then even employing someone is inherently harmful. And based on the framework that we've agreed on, that shouldn't even be allowed. So your position would prohibit even hiring someone if surplus value is true.
So not necessarily. See, this has to do with what we actually measure. Surplus value can both be true and employing someone can be a positive thing because things don't just, again, exist in convenient little
Yeah.
bubbles. Somebody does not, if somebody in their particular material reality doesn't have wages, as in, or doesn't have income rather, because wages is a type of income. So doesn't have income, period, and then they do have income past this point, that can be a benefit to them
Yeah,
right
but
now.
it wouldn't be enough. So if you imagine the benefit that they deserve, they'd have this much, whereas they deserve this much. And so that little gap would be theft. That would be a harm, correct?
That can
Yeah.
that I would say that is definitely a harm, and there's certainly instances that we've not we as in you and I, but that businesses have put in to try to exploit
Yeah.
more.
I mean,
labor out.
we can get into that if you'd like. Perhaps it'd be better for a different debate
that's
about
probably a
whether
different-
surplus value.
Yeah,
is
that's
a,
probably
Okay,
a
I'm
different
going
debate.
to I'm going to pause the timer really quick. Suris, do you need to take a second to have things stop shouting on your end, or?
Hold on. Growlith.
There's 10 minutes and 56 seconds left on my timer if you want to synchronize yours,
Where's-
Michael.
wait, 10 minutes and 50 seconds?
10 minutes and 56 seconds is what I've got left on mine.
Okay.
I can reset it up to 11 minutes if you guys need, but background noise is getting to be distracting, so I wanted to give him a chance to stop that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
So Aaron is going to take Growlith out, which will help. A lot of the problem is that when I'm streaming, sometimes I can pay attention to Growlith, and sometimes Aaron and Raz can pay attention to Growlith. But right now everybody's painting, so everybody's like, Growlith, you have to stay out of the room. There's literally paint. You're tracking everywhere. My floor looks like paw prints.
Okay,
that has been
so
solved.
again, sorry for interrupting. It was getting really distracting, and I wanted to make sure that everybody can actually think straight. So I'm resetting the timer to 11 minutes flat, and we will start from here. 11 minutes. Proceed.
So,
Oh, go on.
So yeah, I mean, maybe we should have a separate debate about surplus value and like Marxist economics. I don't think surplus value is real because I think profit is just a result of people valuing different things at different rates. Someone sells me a car for $2,000, and then I find someone else who values that car at $3,000, and I sell it to them. Profit occurred, no exploitation happened. I mean, if you want to give like a response to that, but it might be better just to, well, yeah, give a response, but we can have a longer in-depth.
So I'd say my response to that is that yes, value. I would say we'd both agree that value is arbitrary. Value is something that is imposed on something rather than there. But value is also oftentimes manufactured. So like one of the values that is sometimes manufactured, and this is probably where I'll end it so we can stay on the actual debate itself. One of the values that is generally manufactured is also the value of the employee, not just the product. So by that argument, there's nothing that happens if I pay an employee $1 today and then $2 tomorrow and then pay him 50 cents the next day because all of that was arbitrary. But that's probably a discussion we will have at another date if you're open for having that kind of discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So
Okay.
for the question of, okay, so you make the argument that hiring someone isn't just taking back what you gave, it's putting them into like a worse existence, right?
It can be. It can be. In
right?
in some cases it is. In some cases it's not. For instance, for me, me getting fired from I was working at a call center at one point. Me getting fired from that call center benefited me personally because it allowed me more time to focus on YouTube. But me getting fired from a different retailer when I was working for Aldi a long time ago, being fired from them was an overt negative. They're the only two places I've ever been fired from, so I'd give more examples, but I don't have them.
That's fair. So I want to give you a hypothetical and tell me what you think.
Okay.
So let's say that a family member of mine gets in a serious accident where they're in a coma and they're on life support, and I am the only person.
You can just say the violinist argument. You can just say this is the violinist argument.
Yeah, the violinist argument. So basically what happens is, someone goes into a position where they need help and I'm sustaining their life. And if I were to stop sustaining it, if I were to stop giving them that positive, their existence would go into a worse position. Now, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm not causing that. Because the only thing preventing them from being in that worst existence is my help. So let's imagine I don't exist. If I don't exist, they die, right? Okay, so then I do exist, they still die. If in both worlds they die either way, then I couldn't have caused that.
So again, you're trying to equate what you're doing is committing a category error here, because what you're doing is you're equating giving help to someone, doing a positive action there, to firing, which is a different kind of action. In this action, the person had the job, and firing, like, if you're going to try to argue that firing the concept is immoral, I would disagree, because firing the concept is not immoral. You're allowed to fire people, but it's on what grounds do I think that is ethical to fire somebody? Do I think, for instance, if you walked in and they said, well, we're going to hire you for this job, and then 2 weeks later they said, actually, so we got a new HR manager and they don't like white people, so you're gone, you're out. That, in that case, I would be fighting for you 110%, because
That sounds a bit
that's
arbitrary
not
to
a
me.
just. It's not necessarily arbitrary though, because
the-
it was
mo-
only arbitrary on the end of the person who fired.
Suris, let him respond, please.
Okay.
So the motivation is immoral. I completely agree. But going back to the situation I give, where like, let's say I choose not to give money to the homeless people because I really hate them. I'm an evil capitalist and I want them to be poor. My motivations are bad, but I don't harm them because I literally don't affect them at all. It's the lack of effect. So I'd say in the same situation, if you're about to hire someone and you're like, actually, you're white, JK, you're not harming anyone.
So
Your motivations are bad, but you're not harming them.
so this is different. What the example I gave you, and this has happened several times throughout the conversation, the example I gave you was of firing. You existed in this.
Okay,
in
we
this
can
as
talk
an
specifically
employee.
about firing then if you like.
And the reason I'm sticking on that, it's not just because I'm like, this is the one way I can win. It's because the Supreme Court ruling was directly about right to fire. You can choose, like in the current setup, you can choose not to hire somebody because they're black. The Supreme Court ruling allows for that. What it doesn't allow for is once somebody is an employee, it's a workers' protection once you are an employee from being fired. I actually have the text of the Supreme Court ruling here if you'd like me to read the part that matters.
I'll
from this.
believe you. I'll believe
Okay.
you. That's fine. So let's imagine let's imagine I'm like a billionaire and I want like a woman I can be a sugar daddy to. So I'm like, hey, come with me. I'll pay you so much money. You'll be so wealthy. So she gets with me and her lifestyle greatly improves. She starts buying all these nice things. She lives in a better apartment. Like her existence is better than it was before. And then I decide, I don't want to be with you anymore. I found a cuter chick. I'm going to pay her instead. So I stop giving her money. Now she stops being wealthy. She stops being able to afford the fancy apartment she has and buying all the nice clothes. So her existence is now worse than it was before. I think that's identical functionally to me firing someone and making their economic situations worse than they were before. What's the difference?
So the difference here, let's say that I am if I were to construct a reductio ad absurdum, it will take me a little bit if you would allow me the time to construct the reductio.
Okay.
So let's consider a reductio of this. Let's say I am going into a business. I'm going to start working for this business. Currently, I do not personally live with my parents. This is my own house, but let's say that I did for the purpose of
5-minute
this.
warning.
Okay. Let's say that I live with my parents for this, and then I go to this company, and I start working for them. A year down the road, they get a different HR manager, and during this time that I've been at the company, I've moved on behalf of the company. I've moved to a different area geographically, and I'm completely cut off from everybody else because I have done for the company a thing that they requested me to do for the job. I need the money, so I'm going to do that thing. This manager, instead of following a company policy, which says that I have to be fired with there being a paper trail, there has to be things that I've actually violated for me to be fired. This HR manager decides, you know what? I don't like you because you look kind of Indian, which, I mean, that is my genetics, so of course I do, somewhat. They decide that they want to take me, they fire me right then because of that. I don't just go back to where I was. My entire situation has changed, and in this reductio, it has changed on behalf of the company, because to have this job, I needed to do that. There's also a giant material difference between being a sugar daddy and being a boss with a contractual obligation to a company and also to the government in power wherever you happen to be.
Gotcha. Okay. So if the contract was indefinite, as in they didn't say, we will hire you if you move out here, if you meet all these conditions, but rather the contract is, if you move out here, we might hire you and we can fire you at any time, which is how a lot of businesses do operate, then I'd say you took that risk. You weren't obligated to go out there. And so an analogy is, and this is kind of even less contractual, but let's say that I want to get to a news outlet because I'm a political commentator. So a big news outlet says, hey, I mean, if you demonstrate that you're really well and you come to our internship, we'll hire you, right? And so I go there and I move across the country to go to their internship, and then I don't do well enough and they don't hire me. They haven't harmed me because it was my choice to go across there. I took the risk.
That's fair, but again, you've moved the goalpost from firing when somebody is an employee back to hiring. I'm
Okay,
again.
we could say the same thing. With
You
firing,
you
we'd say,
you move out. You are an employee,
sure,
and therefore
we can say the
and
same
then you
thing
get
about.
fired.
I'll apply it to firing. I'll say,
Okay.
hey, I want someone to do this job. I'm not going to specify any duration because, my life's kind of crazy right now. Maybe I stop having enough money to pay you. So come move out here if you'd like, be a web developer for me, but know that I might fire you at any time. If those are the conditions, you take that risk.
See, if those are the conditions, though, those are conditions that exist, generally speaking, not in corporations. That's a material condition that exists normally on an individual basis. As an example, I just had a new air conditioning unit installed from a friend. I paid him for the labor for doing that. That's the type of condition that exists there. If I didn't have the money when he came here, then we'd have a different conversation. This is different when we're talking about corporations. Corporations have different beholdings. Continue.
So I would make the argument that if a condition is not specified in the contract, it's like presumed, or rather the lack of a condition. So if they haven't specified, we will hire you for this amount of time, and these are the conditions that would result in you being fired. If those are not specified, then your default presumption should be that it's an indefinite contract with at the discretion of the owner. I mean, that's just how like contracts work. Like if I want to date someone and I say, hey, let's date me, and I don't put any conditions on that, their presumption should be he can break up with me at any time.
So while that's fair, generally speaking, let's take a company like Walmart as an example. Their condition, would you agree that if a company like Walmart, whose condition is that you get hired, but for them to fire you, they have to give you a verbal warning, then a written warning, then they give you what's called a D-Day. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept. They literally make you leave and write a note. And to say why you need to stay at the company, and then after you write your note, you're able to stay, but you have one strike before you're gone. If they circumvent
Last minute.
Okay, if Walmart circumvents all of that and just says you're black, we don't want you, again, different HR manager, whatever, is that like, what do you think of that scenario? Do you think that's...
Oh yeah, that's totally unacceptable. I said in my response to your video, if there's a contract and they go against that contract, that's theft, which is a harm.
Okay, so what I would say then, the point that we might agree on, because that actually might be a really interesting area to end this on, the point we might agree on is that maybe we should try to construct a reality where businesses are obligated to create contracts that thoroughly outline the conditions that will get them fired, and if a business does not thoroughly outline these conditions, that is a problem. Would you agree with that?
So, if I know there's only 15 seconds, but my response might take a little bit longer, like 30. Is that okay?
That's fine.
So, I would say that, if two people want to do a certain action with whatever conditions they want, who are we to impose it on them, right? So if someone wants to pay someone $5 an hour and that person's like, yeah, that's good enough for me, why would we force them not to? So I would say the same argument about individual liberty is applying here. What you think fair conditions are is your opinion. You shouldn't get to force that on someone else when they're setting their own conditions for their own business.
Okay, so I had added 15 seconds on. Do you mind giving Suris at least 15 seconds to respond?
Yeah, I don't really mind how long this goes. So.
Okay.
Then after this, we'll do our 5-minute stuff and then possibly questions, whatever we end up doing.
All right. Last 15 seconds. Timer starts now.
So, I'll be honest. My brain did a thing where it just took everything Michael said and blanked it. So, Michael, if you could do me a favor, and Alika, if you're okay with it, could you restate what you said so that I can say it again?
Sure. Yeah. So, if two people want to do a certain action with certain conditions, they should be allowed to, because that's their choice. Who are you to impose certain subjective conditions of what you think are reasonable when it's their life, their business?
Okay.
If someone wants to pay someone $5 an hour and the other person wants to work for $5 an hour, that's fine.
So my question would be, would you extend this particular rhetoric when a child is involved, as an example?
Yeah.
So if a child wants to perform any action for $5, you would say that, yeah, they should be allowed to do so regardless of the action, because who are we to impose?
I mean, there are different libertarian...
That was 15 seconds. Do you guys want to add an additional amount of time for the freeform section?
Actually, I have a proposal. Since we are in freeform right now, I think the 10 minutes that we were going to use for ending statements, maybe it would be better if we just use that time to continue the conversation. That seems more constructive.
Yeah, so how long would the open statements be?
So, well, originally we would have gone into
5 minutes,
5-minute closing statements each. instead of doing the closing statements, I'd say we just continue the conversation for those 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could also do just like a 1-minute closing statement for both
Yeah,
if
that'd
you
be
wanted
fine.
to do.
Okay, so just to make it clear, I'm starting another timer for 10 minutes, and then you're each going to get a 1-minute timer for a closing statement after that, correct?
Okay.
Yep, that'll work.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
so I'm starting a 10-minute timer now, so you can sync it up as well, Michael, and yeah, I'll let you guys know when that's about to go off.
So, in responding to your question about children, there are different libertarian ideas or stances on children. So, it's not like all libertarians believe that children can consent to absolutely anything. In terms of a job, I don't think that's harming them, right? I don't think jobs inherently harm anyone if they agree to work for it, right? Presumably, the parents would be allowing it too. But just so you know, like the discussion of
presumably,
children,
not necessarily.
yeah, presumably. But my point here is that the discussion of children is kind of a separate debate because, I mean, if children can't consent, then under a libertarian framework, that would be the only exception, right?
Okay.
So I could easily hold that position.
Okay, so I'm glad you said that because I hold the position that a child cannot consent because of the display and power dynamics. So when somebody is in, this is the same issue that I have with things like incest and etc. When there's a juxtaposed power dynamic, it's very hard to determine consent. Ironically, this is not something I'm trying to throw into the debate. This doesn't matter for the debate, but this is also one of the issues we have in 35 states right now, where a police officer can actually solicit sex from a detainee, even though it's impossible for us to determine consent in that situation because the power dynamic is so thoroughly shifted in one area. That's just a fun thing I found out while doing research that made me a little upset.
So I would say that a convincing argument for why children shouldn't be able to consent to that isn't that there's a power imbalance, but that children are just not moral actors. They're not capable of that, and they're not intelligent enough. That would be a more convincing argument. But in terms of power dynamics, like if someone needs my kidney, and I'm the only one who can give them my kidney, I have a power imbalance there, but I'm still allowed to not give them my kidney, and I'm not harming them by doing that because, again, they die on their own. I'm not killing them.
So I do have a question here. So if let's think of a hypothetical where multiple corporations work together through lobbying or otherwise to push employees into poverty, would do a couple things. It would make employees a lot more reliant on those corporations. These corporations also subsequently monopolize all of the abilities for the employees to generate wages on their own. As an example, it's very hard to run a hardware store right next to a Walmart and an AutoZone when those two corporations have cannibalized your ability to do anything. Right. So if those corporations work together to push employees into poverty by making their pay rate low enough to where they have to subsist on them, would you argue that they should be allowed to do that?
Yeah, and because the lack of a positive is not a negative. Even if people are dying, letting people die isn't killing them. Now, I know that might be like a bad, or rather like an undesirable consequence.
I'd say it goes against the principles of Stoicism.
Well, yeah, I have a personal morality that I am obligated to help people, right? But the point is, I can't force my personal morality on other people.
So you're willing to, I'm not going to say it's special pleading, but you are effectively saying that even though you personally have a responsibility as a Stoic to, because Epictetus would say that the principle of justice requires you to do whatever you can in order to fight for somebody else's rights here. You would say that even if the material reality of somebody else is that injustice is being opposed on them, you could not intercede.
No. So I wouldn't say that injustice is being imposed on them. Depending on how you define injustice. If we're talking about this like meta morality of liberty, I don't think letting people die is an injustice. On a personal morality, it's an injustice, but not in a liberty violation. People dying because others won't help them isn't harmful. It's not a violation of liberty. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm not. So it's one of those things that like, does it make sense as a thing that you've explained and that I can interpret it? Yes, but is it a thing that I can agree with? Not personally, because I think that an idea of justice that is okay with, as an example, hundreds of thousands of people dying, millions of people dying, etc. An idea of justice that is okay with that, I feel is inherently unjust. I don't think that that's, especially when you consider the fact that these people dying has to be weighed against, well, what are they dying for? Is there a reason that this is happening? And if the reason is fully and totally arbitrary, I don't see how that's just.
Well, I guess I'll rejoin with a quote from Watchmen, which is that you should never compromise, even in the face of Armageddon. You should do what's right and let the consequences follow. So, I mean, presumably hundreds of not even millions of fetuses like die. Billions of people are not born because of abortion. I'm sure hundreds of thousands of people die because they don't get kidney transplants. These are obviously unfortunate consequences, but we shouldn't look to the consequences. We should look to the principle that allows the consequences to exist. So let's say that a woman doesn't date me. That's kind of an unfortunate consequence. I don't like that. But I understand that the principle of liberty means she's allowed to do that. So regardless of if I like it, I have to respect it.
So the thing is, though, that those consequences go both ways. So the consequence of her not dating you is obviously unfortunate for you because you won the genetic jackpot. I did not.
450, 5-minute warning.
Okay.
Thank you.
But that consequence is twofold. So if you were to, if we can ignore the liberty part for a second, because if you were to pursue her after being told no and violate and whatever, obviously not saying that you would in case somebody tries to clip this, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think Michael would do that. But if we are in a situation where you would pursue when otherwise told no, there's a consequence that's measurable to that as well. If you view things, this is the difference between saying everything is the consequence, appeal to consequence fallacy. There's also the moral framework of consequentialism, which views all these things as a series of interacting webs.
So with that situation, I wouldn't say that it would be bad for me to go against her after she says no because of the consequence. I would say it because I'd be violating her liberty. And so in the same way, like, let's say someone wants to work for someone and then that person refuses to do it, and then they force them to with legislation like anti-discrimination laws. I view that as the same thing. It's a violation of liberty.
Okay. So when you're talking about something like the kidney transplant, I personally find that these are red herrings because they're talking about a needs-based justice system, whereas when we're talking about the firing issue, we're talking strictly and solely about somebody already has the thing, and then you revoke the thing. Firing itself, I'm not saying you're strawmanning me with the firing analogies, but I think firing requires just cause. There needs to be a just cause in there, and
does denying someone a kidney require a just cause? Let's say my motivation.
Yes, there actually is a just cause for
because
that.
it's like it's your life, right? But let's say that that's not my reason, and my reason is I just want you to die. Is that okay? Let's say I know I will live without it.
Firing is not analogous to not giving a kidney. Firing is analogous to you gave them the kidney and then you removed the kidney from them.
No, that's not the argument. So
that is the argument. You've given them the kidney. You've already given them the job. Their position was a +1 once you gave them the kidney. And then you removed the kidney. It was your kidney. You grew it. You did it. You removed the kidney afterwards. It's now a -1. They're back where they were before you interceded.
I got it.
This hasn't violated them in any way, shape, or form.
I take away, so I take back, I guess, employment, but I don't take anything from them. So the money I gave to them, I'm not taking back when I stop employing them. I just stop giving them more money. In the same way, like, I could apply that exact reasoning you just now used to relationships. A woman agreed to date me, and then she took that relationship away from me. So she took it from me. It's like, no, she didn't. She just stopped giving it to you.
I can see all the incels in your chat getting mad at that. Just
I know, right? No, my chats are chats. They got it.
They got it. They got it.
Yeah.
They're good. Okay, cool. I wish I could say the same about mine. I'm kidding, guys. I'm kidding, guys. I see the fan art you guys submit. I know that you all have problems. I'm kidding. So if the basis of your argument is that you would say that the basis of your argument is not that giving the kidney and then taking it away is basically what's happening there, even though functionally,
no, it's not.
Okay, but functionally the situation with giving and taking away the kidney is identical. If a person's dying on the thing, you give them the kidney, now they're not. You take the kidney away, now they're dying again. They're back to where they were.
I can explain the distinction. So when you give something to someone, you transfer ownership to them. So taking it back is theft. If I give you food, it's yours. If I take it back, that's theft. What's actually happening is let's say someone is they're starving because they don't have money to buy food. So I give them some money, so now they're not starving. And then I stop giving them money. I don't take back the money. I just stop giving them more money. So then they go back to starving and they die. I didn't harm them. I just stopped helping them.
Okay, and this again seems to be attacking the essentially straw man that I'm saying firing is an immoral act.
That is
not.
firing.
I'm not saying that firing, but I'm not saying firing is an immoral act. Firing is amoral. Firing can happen for moral reasons. This person was sexually harassing people in the bathroom. That's a moral reason to
Please
fire.
wrap up.
Okay. Whereas I would say an immoral reason to fire would be that this person happens to be black. I'm firing them because they're black.
I would agree. I would just say the morality of why someone does something has nothing to do with if that action is harmful.
Okay, so with that, we are going to transition to closing arguments. The way that the debates were generally structured was that the negative position did first closing arguments, and then the positive position did final closing arguments. And from there, we can talk about whether we're going to read super chats or chill with reading the chat or whatever you guys would like to do. Is that agreeable to the two of you, that particular order?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, so you guys agreed to amend from a 5-minute closing argument to a 1-minute closing argument, so I'm now going to set the timer. Suris, do you need any time to prepare your closing statements? I can give you 2 minutes of prep time.
I don't think I need to prepare, because I feel like if I prepare, I'm going to accidentally throw in another argument into here, and that's not really kosher.
Okay, so timer starts now. Here is your 1 minute for your closing statements.
So I would say that while Michael's internal definitions of harm and morality and everything that has been preceding that may be consistent within his particular framework, internally consistent to himself, his arguments and everything else do not exist in a vacuum. None of these things exist in a vacuum. I think the argument that +1 exists in a vacuum and -1 exists in a vacuum, and then when you collide them together, you have a neutral again, that doesn't affect material reality. That's not exactly how we see things play out all the
30
time.
seconds.
I would think if we both agree that it is immoral to fire somebody for being black or immoral to fire somebody for being gay or trans, my question would be, why would Michael argue for the reality that would lead to more of that happening? And as I said in previous sections, we can measure that happened more before the Civil Rights Act. Why would we argue for more of an arguably worse world?
Michael, do you need time to prep your closing argument?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to set a 2-minute timer, and let me know when you are done. Oh, looks like we still got 228 people chilling in our chat, which is nice.
It's amazing how if I take this and decide to edit it for brevity, it's amazing how many periods of just silence I will have to cut out of the VOD in order to make it all line up correctly.
Apologies to anybody in the chat for the breaks. These can be standard in some styles of debate, so we're trying to be fair and give people the time they need to think. So, I hope I've done a decent job being as fair a moderator as possible.
No, absolutely not. We don't like pagan moderators. It's bad.
Yeah, how dare you bring the dirty pagan onto your channel?
Yeah, I know, right?
Michael, you're muted because
Oh,
of the typing.
Sorry, yeah, I said I was done, but I was muted, so my bad.
I hope I've done a decent job being as fair as possible, by the way, because I'm trying. All right,
great.
so you said you wanted to do a 1-minute closing statement. That is what you agreed to. Timer starts now.
Wait 1 second. Let me get mine.
Okay.
My bad.
No, you're stalling. How dare you?
Did somebody say Stalin?
Don't watch my stream chat. I'm getting all my chat to make arguments for me. Just kidding. All right.
All right, so 1-minute timer. Final statements starts now.
Suris agrees that my arguments are consistent within my framework, but he contests it by saying that they don't exist in a vacuum. That's not a sufficient refutation. He's conceded all of my justifications and explanations as to why my framework is good. He's conceded that people should be allowed to do what they want to do with their own life so long as they haven't harmed anyone. The focal point of this debate has been whether or not hiring someone or firing them post-fact counts as harming. I'd say I'll let the viewers decide who's won that argument, but all of my refutations to his claim that firing is harming have been conceded. Or at least I'm winning on the flow in that sense because of the analogies about like kidney transfers, those sorts of things. The question of this debate is, what is the function of law? I would say the function of law is only to preserve liberty because your life is yours. He asked me, why would I advocate for a world where people are fired for being black and gay? Because I have the principle of liberty and I can't compromise on that principle because who am I to do that? What if they wanted to do that to me? I think we need to extend this humility to all people. You should be humble knowing that whatever you think doesn't take precedence over someone else's right.
Sweet. So that concludes the formal portion of the debate. We've got a couple of super chats that came in that we would like to read off. Michael, are you also monetized? Like, do you have any that you want to read off for your people, or are you going to be heading out just to talk to your audience after this?
I don't know if I have super chats set up, but if anyone wants to ask me questions in the chat, I'll look at them, and if they're good, I'll ask them.
Okay, so if we have question and answer section, Suris, your button's pressed.
Yeah,
so
I
saw you were
realized
talking. How do you guys want to do a question and answer section first off, after we do the super chats on our side? And second, would you like to structure it as each of you picks questions that you want to read from the chat?
So what I'm on my part, I'm fine. Oh, go on.
I was going to say, is this questions against the other side? So my chat would ask you questions, your chat would ask me?
So normally I would be okay with doing something like that at the end of this. Unfortunately, as you can see, when you did the response to my video, my room was green and this is now black. We are in the process of trying to get everything painted. So
okay.
I have 4 super chats on my end that I need to read. If you've got 4 statements or anything that have appeared that you found interesting on yours, I think if you're doing it on Twitch, it's hard to actually, you're not going to be able to actually, you said you just started Twitch? So you're not going to have any monetized.
That's fine. I'm watching the chat. If there are any good questions, I can ask.
Yeah, so I'll read off my 4, which will probably take like half a minute, and then if you've got anything that piques your interest in the next like minute or two, then we'll do that. Elsewise, I would like to say that you have been a good interlocutor, and I have enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you. Likewise.
And also, there was a topic that we said we would debating the efficacy of labor theory of value. Was a thing to discuss later, possibly.
I would love to moderate that debate if you guys would like to do it. We can do it on Suris' channel again, and I'd be happy to be moderator.
Of course you would, you fucking commie. I'm kidding.
Okay, everybody here knows how I got my start on YouTube, all right? If you don't, then you haven't been paying attention.
A failed.
How did you get your start on YouTube?
A failed YouTube channel trying to talk about Marxist economics.
Yes, that failed because of problems with the animating team and nothing to do with any of the other people that were collaborating.
The first super chat that I've gotten here is a $4.99 one from God damn it, guys! Why are you sending more super chats now that we're at the end and I actually have to read these things?
Because we're about to read them.
Oh my God, you guys! Okay.
Jericho, I'm just gonna humble brag for a second. Jericho has been demanding throughout this entire thing that I be a moderator again anytime you do debates on your channel. Apparently,
it would be better, especially when I have people like call for an uprising on my channel, because holy shit, that was bonkers. Okay, first one we have from Brutus Magnuson. If an Olympic swimmer watches someone drown, they have done something wrong. So. I mean, if Michael wants to respond to that, fine. But I think both of us agree that they've done something wrong. It's whether they should be legally accountable for that.
It's whether they've harmed them. That's the distinction.
Yeah, we agree that they've done something wrong. The issue we agree with is the thing we disagree with on most is what constitutes harm. I for Brennan for $5 says I'd argue that if you have to declare you're winning an argument, you're not. So I will say that I will call Michael out on this a little bit. When you say I'm winning this and then try to throw something afterwards saying, but I'll leave it for the audience to decide, that factor of saying, but I'll leave it for the audience to decide afterwards, doesn't change the fact that that is a bit of a subtle mind trick, a little bit.
Yeah, that wasn't my intention. So, like I told you, I did competitive debate formally in high school for 2 years, and so The way it works is you flow all of the arguments, and it's basically like a flow chart. You keep track of them, and at the end of the debate, when you're talking to the judge, you're explaining why you won certain arguments. So I'm not trying to do any mind tricks or just say I've won the debate. I'm just trying to
I've done it. It's like,
However, you did say that during the rebuttal phase, not during the closing statement, so that's why he's calling you out.
Oh, well, I was flowing during the rebuttals as well, so I was just keeping track of the arguments at that point. But yeah, just clarifying my motivations. I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm winning the debate.
he's trying. He's sitting here like Stephen Molyneux. I'm going to put eggs in the conversation.
Yeah.
Alexander Watt for the $5. This is better than any of the 2020 Democratic primary debates. That's because in the Democratic primary debates, nobody was allowed to speak. They were given like 30 seconds each to talk and then told to shut up. Like, no.
Hey, Sidark from the chat, as far as controlling call for an uprising, I'm going to just very gently drop the fact that the channel that I came from had far, far more chaos than even what I saw on that stream.
I actually got an apology out of call for an uprising. That was weird. From What the Craft, people don't just lose wages, they often also lose healthcare. Is that not theft of access?
No, because I would make the argument that you don't have a right to healthcare because healthcare is provided by the voluntary service of other people, which means they can deny it to you. So, yeah.
So I don't want to start a debate right now because we've already obviously concluded the debate. But whether or not healthcare is a right and how those are constructed is certainly something we can have as a debate later in the future as well.
Yeah,
so is this
sure.
going to become like a series on the channel? Like, you know, did we
That
just
would be
do
awkward.
moderated debates?
Moderated debates with one person.
Just Michael. Well, you can make like a weekly series. It's like a podcast.
We just fucking fight each other on something.
Yeah.
Insolent Shocker for $5 says, having a job would be having money, which would be more liberty. How much liberty do you have without a dollar in your pocket? So that's the... I think I can speak for Michael a little bit on here. There's a conflation between liberty and freedom.
Exactly.
Here.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't even call that one freedom, but yeah, you got the argument.
I would call it freedom. Like because I've made the argument during the debate that there is a level of freedom you have that is directly proportional to your monetary ability. But that's not the same thing as liberty. Liberty has to do with negative freedoms, whereas the concept of freedom I'm arguing for has to do with things you can actively do, which are positive ones. At least in many cases. Jake 4D for $5 says, if we had UBI, healthcare for all, free education through college and other social programs, would it still be immoral to fire someone for any reason? That's an interesting... I kind of grappled with that one a little bit when prepping for this one. If we lived in a society where like your survival wasn't determined by wages, would it be immoral to fire? I think that it would be more moral to... It would be less immoral to fire somebody for arbitrary reasons if their ability to survive was not like directly coincided with your ability to provide them wages. But that's not the reality we live in right now.
Okay,
So-
so
Hold on,
Michael, do you have...
Michael wanted to say something to that as well.
Okay, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I can go to the questions.
Well, I mean, if you wanted
actually,
to
yeah,
comment,
I did have
if you want to
something,
comment,
yeah.
you have the opening to do so. I jumped, and I'm sorry.
That's fine. So going back to the last question you had about freedom having more money. So I don't think that's a tenable definition of like freedom or liberty, however you want to define it. The concept I'm talking about, which I think is paramount, I call it liberty, is simply that you get to do what you want to do by your own ability. If you're a billionaire or if you're poor, you have the equal amount of liberty if no one's infringing on you. So the reason why I think that is because to say that liberty is correlative with how many options you have creates kind of absurd situations. Like if my girlfriend breaks up with me, technically she's reduced my liberty now because I had an option and she took it away.
Actually, now you have more options. Because
no, because I could cheat on her though. I mean, I could technically be with all of them.
but there'd be a consequence to cheating, which limits your options
Unless
because
I'm
now
really
there's a
good.
consequence against it. Well, I already believe you are there.
The fact that women won't let me cheat is taking away my liberty if we define liberty as the reduction of amount of choices. So I don't think that's a tenable way of defining it.
Well, personally, I think if you are cheating and then the cheating is taken away, it's a +1 and then a -1, and then there you go.
That's true. It's entirely true. Yeah, I think. Yeah. If I heard you correctly, I might not.
You just agreed with a meme, sir.
Okay, so we said that we wanted to give you a chance to respond to 7 or 8 either questions or comments from your chat that you think might be applicable to the debate, or there were statements and questions in Suris's, so pick a good mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can ask a question now for my chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Correct.
So you both from I don't know how to pronounce that, Houston. You both say that firing along unchangeable characteristics is immoral, but Suris has not given a sufficient answer as to why the government needs to regulate morality. What's your response to that?
My response to that is that the world we existed in pre having the ability to stop employers from doing that led to more people being in poverty, more people being unable to afford paying for their families, and especially since it started with the Civil Rights Act, most of those people didn't have generational wealth to fall back on either. The material reality we constructed is a net positive in comparison to the one we had beforehand. I don't want to return to the previous material reality.
Okay. Another question is, what world is worse? A world where a body or a person has the decision to decide morality in what is just for other people, or one where people, through enforcing their own liberty, culturally approve and disapprove of practices? So I guess an example would be choosing not to buy from businesses that are anti-LGBTQ.
So it depends. When we think about these things as far as like hypotheticals go, and we can ignore all nuance, then we can say that yes, this is a better reality where everybody has maximum liberty and everything else. But the unfortunate reality is as human beings, we have a history going back very far of discrimination and, in fact, killing each other over material differences. Look at things like the Salem witch trial as an example. If everybody were a moral person, then I would argue that, yeah, we can have a better reality that way. But that's not the reality we live in. If we work strictly in hypothetical, then sure, but I'd argue that we can't. To be fair, I'm also a pragmatist, which is where some of this comes from.
Yeah. A quick response to that. I'd say, like, obviously things like murdering each other doesn't count in my framework. I'm saying that because those would be liberty violations. So I wouldn't make the argument that, well, if we let people be immoral, that's going to happen. It's like, no, we just can't let people be immoral when it harms other people. But another question. So do LGBT individuals have the ability to discriminate against straight people for their groups? And I suppose, like, another argument I'll add on to that is, do you consider current programs that indirectly do that, such as like affirmative action programs or quotas in colleges, to be doing that?
So as far as quotas in colleges and affirmative action, I view those as temporary necessities. That should definitely be removed once material reality no longer requires them. So, as an example, if a college has a demographic around it that is 20% black and 80% white, let's just pretend Latinos don't exist for the argument, and they consistently barred, just through policy or otherwise, 95% of black applicants so that they have a fairly homogenized system, I would say that an egalitarian principle such as a quota or affirmative action should exist only until that reality has sufficiently changed. So right now, I don't know if we necessarily need affirmative action as much, at least in the areas that I've been in. But then again, I don't know. I'd say that comes down to statistics and measurements. If you can provide statistics on areas before and after affirmative action, sure, we can talk about that.
The next question is, why does Suris discuss corporations as a hypothetical when small businesses are arguably the most vulnerable and affected? And I think I'll kind of rephrase this question because I'm interested in the answer. What about like sole proprietorships, where it's a business of just like one person, or like small businesses, or let's even say it's a business of like, let's say prostitution's legal. And so, you know, if you don't allow the women to choose who they employ in a sense, then they have to have sex with people they don't want to. Does it change with those businesses?
So it doesn't necessarily change so much. Let's start off. This one's going to take a little bit of time, if that's okay, because there are 4 examples that you gave, thereabouts. Not that you gave, but that they gave. So the first one, if we're talking about a sole proprietorship, so for instance, what I do on YouTube is considered something like that. You create an LLC, you're the only employee, etc. You do everything that way. So the only person I can fire is myself. So I'd say that categorically this doesn't function in there at all. If you've got 3 people in a business and you decide that, as an example, your son became an atheist, so you're firing him because of atheism, as an example, I'd say that that's a terrible discrimination to make, and I would argue they shouldn't be allowed to do that in that particular scenario. Or let's say that you're colorblind and you suddenly found out your adoptive son is black halfway through randomly somehow. Then no, I don't think you should be able to fire them just because of that. I think that would extend to those businesses, and I don't think that's a vulnerability. I live in an at-will state, so, and this was something that I had talked about before I revised my opening statement, but I live in an at-will state. Companies can be very creative with how they go about firing you. When I was fired from Aldi, for an example, I was fired for lack of empathy. That was the reason given on paper. So a company can easily get creative if they desperately want to fire you. Just saying you can't fire him because he's black doesn't change the fact that they can fire you. They just can find another reason to do so. And then when it talked about prostitution, personally, if prostitution were legal, should a prostitute be allowed to say, I don't want to serve a particular client? I would say yes, because their ability to determine what clientele they have is directly proportionate to their personal safety. And when it becomes a safety issue, then I have to go, well, normally you do what your employer says, but much like if my employer says, stick your hand in the fry vat, and I can say no because that's an issue of personal safety, then I would say that the prostitute should also be able to say, well, no, there's an issue of personal safety here.
Okay. I mean, just let me know when you guys want me to stop reading questions, because I have plenty more.
I'd say you've done 3 so far or 4 so far?
Mm-hmm. I think 4.
4? Okay, we'll do 3 more, and then we'll get to that point.
So there's an argument right here, which is it sounded like if a contract was measured as fair, thorough, then both of you agree. However, if it is deemed unfair, somehow the employer is responsible. Are you arguing that we should arbitrarily force equality on the formation of the contract? Also, if not all firings cause mental harm, how can you argue firing causes harm? I guess an extra point I'll do is, what about the mental health of like the person being employed? What if they just cannot be comfortable around gay people? Stupid, but some people are like that.
Okay, so first of all, mental harm is generally measured as far as things like trauma are concerned. Personal discomfort with somebody being gay is not something that generally measures the same way on, like, for instance, when we look at the enlarged amygdala for things like PTSD, these things don't measure the same way. So you being personally uncomfortable with working with an atheist or working with a gay person is not the same level of harm, and I would argue even is not harm. That's harm you're literally consenting to on your own. In fact, as a Stoic, you would probably agree that that's harm that they are imposing on themselves because they agreed that somebody being gay somehow affects them.
I think all mental harm is imposed by yourself.
You think all mental harm is imposed by yourself? So PTSD is imposed by yourself.
I think you can deal with PTSD.
So an enlarged amygdala, which is that's like saying that you can deal with a heart arrhythmia, or you can deal with not having a leg. You can just walk on the leg normally.
No, I'm not making that claim.
But you are, because that's how the brain works.
Yeah, no, so you might have
It's not just
emotions.
A mind over matter thing.
Okay, Suris, you're being obnoxious. Let Michael answer.
You're really good at that, okay?
So if obviously you can't just not have emotions, but the Stoic claims that you can deal with them in productive ways. So if someone has PTSD, the idea is you should just let that flow over you, right? Like, kind of separate yourself from the emotions. Now, obviously it's difficult, but and even if you don't voluntarily choose to have PTSD, the argument is that it's still your responsibility to deal with it, right? It's no one else's responsibility. So now, sure, they shouldn't try to trigger it. That'd make them bad people. But if someone accidentally triggers it, you can't claim that they're guilty. That's the argument.
So if somebody fully knowing that firing a gun near somebody can potentially trigger PTSD and they do it anyway, they shouldn't be held responsible for that.
I mean, you could make the argument that firing guns just poses like hearing risks, but I mean, that's an interesting debate. I'd love to talk more about that, but I think that's kind of a very untenable basis, because let's say that someone has PTSD about just conversations about rape. And so if I make the argument on Twitter and someone reads that, now they get a PTSD, they go triggered, now I'm responsible, right? I don't think other people should be responsible for how other people react.
So there is a material difference between posting something on the internet and then somebody voluntarily reading it, and then versus occupying a space where somebody may or may not have that same ability to vacate, and then making that space willfully unsafe.
I think I'll say this. If you enter into the public domain, then you take the risk to hear things that might make you uncomfortable. Now, if someone's in your house and they're just talking about rape, and you're like, please stop, get out of my house, and they don't, then they're harming you because they're in your property. But the moment you enter into the public domain, like, you take that risk that you're going to hear things you don't like that might upset you.
So by that same logic, though, I take the risk going outside that somebody's going to punch me in the face.
No, so I would, again, the distinction is, I'd say someone being upset because of words they hear isn't a harm. Like, that's on them.
Okay, so being upset is not the same as PTSD. Have you
Yeah,
actually as an example, have you actually dealt with somebody with PTSD? Have you, like, for any amount of time?
I don't think so. And I'll say, okay, if PTSD is like I haven't studied PTSD too much, but if PTSD were a condition where, like, if certain words were said, brain damage will happen conceivably, then you could make the argument that you shouldn't be allowed to, like, imagine
that actually is how it works.
Hey guys, can I step in for a second? Michael, for the purposes of this discussion, PTSD is a physiological condition. It is an involuntary stress response that originates in both the body and the brain and can be triggered by specific things completely involuntary and instantaneously. This is just, I'm not trying to argue for or against your point here. I'm just letting you know. You said you don't know what the definition of PTSD is. I'm providing one because I have it. So
yeah, I'm saying the discussion of PTSD is interesting because, I mean, if it functions that way, then that brings in different levels of, debate. Like, imagine that there are certain words that if you say, they're like a Harry Potter spell and they just kill people. Obviously, those shouldn't be allowed. So if it is the case that just saying certain words triggers like an uncontrollable physical response in the brain that damages them, then I think you could maybe make arguments that shouldn't be allowed. I think we should further explore that some other time. But for most cases, mental harm is your own responsibility.
So I would say your response to mental harm is your responsibility, but mental harm itself, not necessarily. But again, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, like the question of PTSD.
Well, Michael, if you ever want to have a conversation about it sometime, like, given that I actually have it and have personal experience with it, I would love to chat with you.
Sure.
Again, I'm not trying to interrupt your arguments one way or the other here. Yeah. I'm just letting you know.
I'm also speaking from a position of two things. One, I'm from a military family, which means that I deal with people all the time who have had to go into combat situations. I am also dating a military veteran as well, who has PTSD and has to receive medication and therapy for that PTSD specifically. So, like, I'm speaking from the position of somebody who lives in this reality, who deals with this day by day. So, I don't mean to come off as arrogant when I'm like, that's not how that works. I have the privilege, insofar as it is a privilege, to live with that all the time, so I know what it looks like.
Yeah. I guess the reason why I'm responding to the question of PTSD like that is many of the, I guess, Stoic figures I read, like Epictetus, experienced terrible, trauma. Like, he was abused by his master. They'd just break his leg.
I mean, Cicero's hands got fucking strung up in a forum.
Yeah, like plenty of, and so, I see throughout history, there are these people who experienced absolutely terrible things, and they're still able to control themselves. I mean, like, monks are able to sit on fire, dying, without any reaction. So I do believe that the human will is stronger than any type of circumstance you might experience. But again, it's an interesting question. Another question is from Idlework, which is, all of the examples that were used throughout the debate at a fundamental level are voluntary agreements that either do or do not impinge on the liberty of anyone involved. Why does Suris specially treat firing? What is the distinction?
The distinction is not that I'm specially treating firing anyway. It's that the Supreme Court ruling was only about firing. So categorically, that is what the discussion is about. The only reason that I kept bringing the discussion back to firing is because that is the resolution of the discussion.
No, yeah.
That's the whole reason for that.
I think the question is, in terms of, like, this framework of harms and liberty, why do you treat firing as different from, let's say, giving a poor person money and then stop giving them money, etc.?
So so when it comes to giving a poor person money versus not, there's not a contractual agreement there. There's not any system in place there. When it comes to firing, we're dealing with a specific category of principles that have to do with entering an agreement where you now receive particular workers' rights. In some areas, these workers' rights are protected by what's called a union. In some areas, they're not. I've worked in both union and non-union jobs. Ironically, as the socialist in the conversation, the union job was the worst job I've ever had. But that's neither here nor there. There are bad unions and there are good unions. When you enter into employment, there are certain protections that you have on yourself as a working class citizen. One of those protections right now, legally, is that you cannot be fired for your race or your birth sex. That was now extended into whether or not you are gay, trans, bi, etc. The reason that I make the distinction specifically is because legally, in our current society, when you enter employment, you begin having those material protections over you. That's part of the contractual agreement with an employer, because an employer can't function as an employer without those contractual agreements with the state that allows them to operate with a business license.
One more question, or what's the?
Yep,
I
we'll
haven't
do-
been
I
keeping
believe
track.
I think we'll do
this
one more
would be the
question.
last question.
This would be okay.
Again,
Doesn't
I
look
would
good.
like to apologize to your audience if they felt like I was being unbiased there. Michael, you asked for a definition. You said you weren't
Yeah,
sure
that's
about
fine.
what
That's
PTSD
fine.
was, so I just wanted to give you one from personal experience and from years of having worked with a specialist on that regard. So I wasn't trying to
That's fine.
fuck with your argument at all, I promise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm considering this part of the debate to just be very free form. So I mean, if you want to be in the discussion, that's totally fine with me.
No, you don't want me in the discussion.
That's funny. So, there was one more question. It's hard to pick the last question. Let's see. I have two.
What you do is you take a d6 and you roll it, and
A D6.
evens are ones and odds is another.
Yeah.
The reason I said you don't want me in the discussion, by the way, is outside of very formal things, I cut people off a lot.
Yeah. So there's a question about if this applies to minors, and I think I kind of already touched on the fact that there are different libertarian explanations, and I think I'll probably make a video about it in the future. So I'm not going to do that question. So here's one.
I think we settled the minor one pretty easily just by
Yeah.
arguing that minors cannot consent. That's the end of that discussion.
Yeah, well, so if that could be an explanation. So what I'll say is whatever the correct answer is, I will accept because I care about the principle. So if the principle leads to the conclusion that minors can work for $3 an hour, I'll accept that because I don't care about consequences. I care about principles. But so the question is, would it be harmful to force someone to work with or conduct transactions employees that hold disdain for them or that they hold disdain for? Would it be harmful for that person to be forced to work in an environment where their superiors have a hatred for them but cannot terminate the relationship willingly?
Okay, so while it can be harmful, part of workplace protections for discrimination generally extend to a hostile work environment. Michael, I'm not sure if you've worked in if you've worked in any official capacity before. I don't know your life story, so I don't know. So there is a legal protection that you actually have as an employee in most states. Not so much in right-to-work states, but that's neither here nor there. One of those protections is if you happen to leave a company because they've created a hostile work environment, it actually gets considered a firing because it was considered involuntary leaving of the company. It was forced upon you, not unlike being fired from the company. When that happens, it falls into the category of what the Supreme Court ruling put in, which is now that you have decided this is a hostile work environment and you've had to vacate, because it's just what you had to do, now it is actually treated, if you can demonstrate that this was in fact a hostile work environment and that's why you had to leave, the Supreme Court ruling actually starts to factor in here, because now it's considered fired due to that kind of discrimination that was not considered one of the principles you were allowed to fire under. Now we have an issue there. So if the question is like, is this categorically different? Depending on where you are, technically no. Technically it's not categorically different. But
Gotcha.
I think there's another side of that I need to address though, just to make sure that I'm not like talking past the question. The other thing
Do you need a repetition of the question? Like, did you miss it?
No, it's that I think the other side of it is should we allow for that work environment to be so hostile? In that case, there need to be workplace protections so that you can have a workplace environment that is not hostile. I think workers should have a right to a non-hostile work environment, personally. That's just me. Granted, I'm also a socialist, so if we're talking workers shit, like workers' rights is kind of one of the platforms I deal with.
Yeah, that is literally how Suris and I met, by the way.
Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah,
We met because we had a disagreement on whether or not Harry Potter was a mystery novel.
I don't actually remember that being how you and I met. That might have been how you and Xanderhall met, but like you and I met because Xanderhall recommended you to Collective U. Like that is literally how we started talking.
The reason that me and Xanderhall met was because I hopped onto one of his streams when he was doing a call-in thing and was commenting on the fact that he was playing retail World of Warcraft, and I think retail WoW is shit.
Well, like, I do not recall you and I having a discussion about the mystery novel thing. I remember you and I starting to work together because of Collective U.
Okay.
So,
most of my friends I meet because I disagree with them. That's how it works.
I mean, to be fair, our first debate was on Stoicism, so... by the way, for the record, Michael, I'm also a Stoic, which is part of the reason I said you don't want me to talk, because we have fundamental disagreements on certain interpretations of things, and Epictetus, like, I learned Attic Greek so I could read his stuff, so, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you also enjoy their work. Maybe sometime we could talk about our differences.
The next debate I will moderate between you two, then.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like we're wrapping up. Suris, do you mind if I do a shill at the end? Because I've got to stream in literally a half an hour that your audience might be.
Oh, fuck, that's right. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, go ahead.
I did put my link in the live chat to my channel several times, and I'm about to do that again. If you guys have enjoyed some of the side commentary that I've given toward the end, or you enjoy like the kind of content that Suris does and endured. You know what? My brain.
You endured Suris's content. Okay, thanks.
You know, I endured this debate. Anyway, I'm just kidding. You guys, actually, thank you both, by the way, for being as civil as you were. I barely had to step in during the freeform discussion. I'm really, really grateful for that. So thank you guys both for being very, very civil. The last debate that was had on this channel was not nearly so civil, and I was not moderating for it, but I'm really glad that it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah,
so thank you guys both
for being civil. It's been a good discussion.
It has.
For sure. It's just as bad for like Suris as any one of his interlocutors. I've seen him yell at people. So I'm grateful that both of you were good.
For sure.
So the other thing is, though, over on Divine Disbelief's channel, which is where I'm going to be heading after this, I have a weekly series called Secular Literary Circle, where we go chapter by chapter through a book that might be interesting to folks who believe in a more secular society. Right now, we're actually looking at the history of the Judeo-Christianic afterlife. We are halfway into the book on chapter 7, looking at the first emergence within Judeo-Christian thought, or specifically Judaic thought, of the concept of an immediate resurrection or immediate sort of afterlife, which the argument being in the book that it emerged significantly later. So if you guys are interested in history and scholarship, you might really enjoy that particular stream. I put a link to Divine Disbelief's channel over there. We're going to be going live in about a half an hour. I would love to see anybody from your guys' audience that would like to come join us.
Ooh, I'll also plug, go check out my YouTube channel and subscribe if you like my content. It's Michael Moreno Philosophy.
And then I guess I'll plug, if you're watching this, hi, I make shit content. How are you doing?
Also, if any of your viewers like still have questions they want to ask me, they can come to my Discord server. It's on my YouTube banner, and I'm usually on. You can directly ask me questions if you want to have a debate.
Okay. Also, apparently we started the Is Harry Potter a mystery novel debate in the discussion of my chat. Oh my God. Guys, if you're saying it's not a mystery, if you're saying the series is not a series of mystery novels, you're actually wrong. Every single book is about the thesis of what they are going to discover, what mystery they're unfurling. Down to fucking the Half-Blood Prince. Last 3 seconds. It was me. Bye. Just no. Stop. Stop it. Every one of you. Okay. That's it. I think that's all that I've got for my chat there. Just telling them that if they disagree with me, they're wrong for this one thing.
Great. Well, cool. Thank you, guys.
Yep,
I look forward to any potential discussions we have in the future.
Okay. Well, we'll have to figure out if it's either the labor theory of value discussion, or if there was, I know there was another one we mentioned during this.
I think the PTSD was one. I think children was another.
The children consent to labor discussion.
Yeah.
Those are potential ones.
I think that PTSD is more of a conversation than a debate, personally.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like scientific literature, trying to boil that down to a debate means that there are people who end up agreeing with rhetoric as opposed to like material reality, which is kind of a problem. You can't do the scientific method in debate. It doesn't work very well. There's only one peer to review, and it's your moderator.
Well, I enjoy discussions either way, so just let me know.
Yeah, will do.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna head out. Thanks, guys.
All right, see ya. And that is it. I guess now that I'm quite enlarged, it looks strange. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know. Hit the like button, all that other fun stuff. Afterwise, I'm just going to fuck off. See ya. Bye.